These kids are coming with very complex needs, a tremendous amount of fear, stress, and anxiety before they walk in the door. And so how we do social and emotional learning and create safe school environments emotionally is a critical piece of this puzzle.
So we've got two terrific facilitators for this session from Voices for Illinois Children, Gaylord Gieske, who's the Vice President, and Dawn Melchiore, who's the Policy Director, and they're going to lead us through a conversation about continuing Illinois' investment in social and emotional learning.
Now, can you hear me? Okay. We're gonna do this in two parts. First of all, Rachel asked me to open with a few observations and comments, and then we're going to do some brainstorming together. And before we go any further, I want to take a personal point here on behalf of Voices in the Partnership. I want to recognize the work and contribution that Dawn has made to all of us being in this room. What I mean by that is Dawn is on the government relations team at Voices for Illinois Children, and she's the boots on the ground in Springfield, long weeks and months during the legislative session, and has been doing this work since virtually the beginning of the partnership's existence. And she has led the advocacy efforts around the state to actually get funding for the work that we're all doing together. So I want to publicly recognize. Thank you very much. When Dawn and I were talking about this last week, we decided we'd open with a few observations, sort of from, yeah, actually I'd rather do this. This makes me feel more comfortable. We wanted to open with a few observations from the perch at Voices for Illinois Children, and we are a statewide policy and advocacy organization. So we're a bit removed, as you can imagine, from the work at Mary and Karen's level, and we are concerned with kids at all across the state and all kids from birth to adulthood. And we together created a few comments, and what is astounding to us is every single comment we had to make has been made. It has been referenced either by a question from the audience or one or more members of the panel. And when you do advocacy work, what it tells you is to be very excited about the consistency, the momentum, the agreement, and the depth and strength of the collaboration, which is critical. And so I'm going to open with that comment that collaboration got us to where we are, as Roger mentioned in his very opening remark, and that we need everybody in this collaboration. I cannot say how grateful I think all of us who are in the collaboration currently, and those of you in the room that we hope will feel more and more a part of the collaboration, how critical this collaboration has been to getting us where we are. Quite simply, as a state, we wouldn't be where we are without it. And so one of the things we want you to start thinking about is future directions for the collaboration. Another observation we had is that the SEL efforts and the focus on
kindergarten through high school has been fabulous and groundbreaking, but that we need to remember the birth to 5 age group, and that social and emotional learning begins at birth. And for everybody who's in the school setting, you want those little ones to arrive at kindergarten ready to go. And so what happens in those first 5 years is absolutely crucial. And I know there are a number of people sprinkled throughout this room who have devoted their lives to birth to 5, and we want them to feel a part of the social and emotional learning standards and the whole school effort, and that one of the things we need to work harder at is aligning the birth to 5 with kindergarten through high school. And that's a commitment that we at Voices are taking very seriously and hope many, many others will. Obviously, the importance of professional development is key. We've talked about that in many, many presenters. At the heart of this is professionals in the school setting, and for us to arrive at our vision is going to take a lot of focused, intentional, a word that we heard a couple of times at least, an intentional effort to bring professionals along, and that is over a number of years and a multi-strategy commitment. And we need to make that as a state, and we need to make it understandable to many, many broader constituencies as to why that is so important. The next one, the elephant in the room, the funding issue. We need to create more momentum, more advocates, more people speaking out for why this is important, along with other aspects of our children's education and development. And we've got to keep the momentum on and the pressure on, and more people involved, and together as a state, we're going to have to solve these very, very challenging budget issues. And the very lives and future of our children are at stake, and we all have a part to play in that. Again, this was recognized earlier, but we want to again reiterate that without the leadership of Chris Cook at the State Board of Ed, the State Board of Ed itself, and Jesse Ruiz, the chair of the State Board of Ed, we also wouldn't be sitting in this room. They have made commitments to this. The State Board of Ed is under siege and has been for several years when it comes to funding priorities, and they have not set this aside. They haven't said, we're going to have to wait. They have said, this is integral to our future, and we won't approach the governor with his budget making or the General Assembly and their budget making without this on the agenda and without this being one of our priorities. That takes vision, it takes focus, it takes energy, and it takes a passion in them that helps us fuel our passion and vice versa. Another thing that we haven't talked very much about is the status of kids in Illinois. The kids are coming to the schools under a great deal of burden and stress. We have recently published Kids Count, the annual Voices Child Wellbeing Indicator, and Kids Count draws a very, very sobering picture of what our children are confronting by being members of their families. And we are looking at a projected child poverty rate in Illinois by 2012, 2013 13 of 23%. That means almost 1 in 4 children will be living in poverty. And those are the children that are coming to our schools. And those are the children are coming with the burdens of their families and their communities. And we need to understand when they walk in the school door every morning, what is the broader reality of their lives and what we as a state are up against to try and help give those kids a better future. Many of them arrive needing a safe and supportive environment. As those of you who teach them know, and Mary so eloquently told us about some of the kinds of kids she has in her school. These kids are coming with very complex needs, a tremendous amount of fear, stress, and anxiety before they walk in the door. And so how we do social and emotional learning and create safe school environments emotionally is a critical piece of this puzzle. We decided to use the word moral, and we talked about this. It's not a word we actually use very often in our conversations at Voices. We don't get onto that sort of moral imperative, but we feel strongly enough about this that we feel it is a moral imperative, that this is fundamental to every child's education and chance to grow up and succeed, and that the urgency and that moral imperative needs to be woven into the messaging about this. We've all talked about involving the whole school community. The ultimate owners of SEL and our schools are our families and our communities. It is not the teachers who own the schools. It is not people in the school building who are treasured and respected and very, very valuable employees. And it's not the school board, other than that the school board represents the community by being elected or appointed, however your school board works. But the schools belong to our families. And so every step of the way here, and we've heard this, and Mary talked a lot about this, is involving families in how we proceed with the unfolding of this and how we create parent leaders and partners in moving the work forward. Another thing I don't think we've talked enough about is diversity, cultural diversity and language diversity. We have growing numbers of children in every school across the state virtually that represent English language learners, where cultural diversity is something, a dimension that we all bring. We each belong to different cultures, and cultural diversity can either be seen as a huge challenge or something to be fearful of, or it can be embraced and it can be celebrated and it can be put to good use in social and emotional learning. So let's put it to good use and celebrate and respect and engage families in that way too. And finally, we've talked about the importance of educating and thinking about new ways for teacher training and preparation and other related allied professionals, such as all of the counselors and school psychologists, even the school nurses, the bus drivers, everybody in the school. How do we get them so that this is like sort of falling off a rock? This is fundamental. Well, of course, this is not new. This is not sexy. This is so deeply embedded. It is how Mary has her school community environment. And you were an inspiration for all of us, Mary, and we want to thank you for your telling us and sharing. So I'm going to turn it over. turn it over to Dawn, who's going to sort of tell us how we're going to brainstorm together.
Sure. And I want to thank all of you. Being on the boots on the ground in Springfield, I know many of you have endured my years and years of constant emails and begging for phone calls and visiting your legislator and writing letters. And I want to thank all of you. Many of you have immediately sent back everything to me that you've done, and I appreciate that. And it makes my job and those of us that do this work that much easier to know that we have at a community level all of you who are singing the praises. So thank you all very much. We want to start by getting you a little moving around. Feel free to raise your hand, stand up. When we talked earlier and listening to the speakers today, we felt that the way in which we should kind of give you a little bit of structure is to think of some of the different issues in terms of buckets. And we do this quite often. We like the term buckets. I think it's our early childhood background. But we kind of thought about a few of them, and it was good to know that after listening to everyone, I think we were on the right course. First off, we want to talk a little bit about how do we go about building infrastructure, and by infrastructure, it's not only what very much includes professional development, but also training. In that, it can also be state, local funding, policy issues. So start to think a little bit more about that. Where do we take that the next steps? What areas should we be focusing on to move this work forward? The second bucket would be building public awareness. And I believe that was Karen who talked about sometimes they go into schools and they're there and there's no recognition. So it's not only building teacher recognition, administrator recognition, but mainly parent and community level, business communities. Is the business community aware of SEL and the importance of it is in education? I know a lot of business groups, foundations are very actively involved in changing education. Well, are they part of this awareness building piece? And then parents. We can never emphasize the role of parents enough when we talk about awareness and bringing it back into the home and to them being the advocates to maybe sometimes schools who aren't there yet, but parents know and parents are pushing. And then finally, evaluation and research. Really, we get nowhere without having all these pieces all come together in evaluation and research. It's how we tell legislators. It's how we move public opinion. It's how we move our General Assembly to make the funding available and necessary and to really invest in all of that. So those are kind of the buckets. I want to start first, though, with probably the biggest bucket, which is the building of the infrastructure and professional development. I gave you some of the things we were thinking about, but really we want to hear from you. So where are the next steps? Where do you think in your school, in your organization, where in your community, where do you think those next areas of focus should be? How do we move SEL forward? Don't make me pick people.
I'm working on the west side.
Okay.
West Garfield Park, so I'm very race aware and aware that many of the elementary schools located there are scoring, I don't entirely know what this means, but they're scoring 2s on a scale of 10. And they're just the attendance of the children in the schools are at 92%, 93%. So from the perspective where I sit, which is not a universal perspective, I would be asking us to think about the 100 lowest performing elementary schools in the Chicago-Cook County area. We're talking about behavior, we're talking about achievement, and Roger mentioned violence. Violence is, if you talk to parents in West Garfield Park and North Lawndale, and further south, they're extremely concerned about violence. And when Eric Holder and Arnie Duncan visited after the murder of the Darian Albert, their response was to infuse a lot of dollars into the Chicago public school systems for mentoring. That is SEL. It's a form of SEL. But given what all of you know here and Gaylord's call for an emphasis on 0 to 5, the response to that death and the community attention really ought to be calling for intensive investments in social emotional learning for 0 to 5. Mm-hmm. And I recognize that we haven't talked about that much. We're working on a children's zone, so we're really emphasizing 0 to 5 as a necessary foundation.
And just to add to that, also parenting 0 to 3 or 0 to 5, parenting education. We talked a lot about interventions in the schools and social emotional learning taking place in the school setting, which is phenomenal. And teachers and administrators are way overburdened. They're now being charged with raising children, and it really has to start with the family. And Gaylord mentioned that, and Gaylord knows me. I've been talking about this for 15 years. The importance of parenting education and supporting parents in the home, educating them on how to raise children that are emotionally stable, happy, and achieve academically. And framing it because there's a stigma around parenting education, framing it in terms of academic success. You want your children to succeed academically. These are specific parenting skills that have been proven in middle-class society to work. I mean, I'm just not going to mince words here. And so parenting for 0 to 5, parenting education, a lot of resources for that.
And I think that goes well into just the public awareness piece that we'll probably talk about a little bit later, building that awareness.
The children's zone starts with baby college.
Baby college.
It's teaching social emotional parents. It's teaching them a new culture of disciplining children and motivating learning.
Great. Anyone else? Yep, go ahead.
I would say one group to target would be our higher ed, particularly the educational leadership programs. Put Mary on a speaking circuit. Because I feel like that her points about this is a way to do school is really critical. That this is not just a program, it's not just an add-on. That piece about this is a way to do school, it's a whole paradigm, is really critical. And I think getting to those who are going to go into administrative positions in schools is essential.
Yeah, I was struck by Karen's comment about this is the way to do schools. And the immediate comment in my head was, well, is that how they're preparing teachers in college right at this point? Are they doing that? Go ahead.
Is this an appropriate time to comment at all about things that are happening, or are you just wanting to do the brainstorm?
The brainstorm is a brainstorm, and it can lead to other people thinking of other things. So we're gonna go with the flow.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I appreciate the comment, and I just wanted to. Okay, thank you. Just wanted to say that Mary mentioned the School Policies and Standards Committee, which is the committee who actually put together the SEL standards and the template for the district policies. And one of the pieces that committee is working on now has to do directly with higher education. And we are, in fact, have just, under the leadership of Tony Talarud and Brenda Lindsay, have just completed a survey that is currently out and available to help me, Tony, to schools, folks who are training in schools of education, social work, counseling, nursing, and that might be it, okay, thank you, and administrators, to find out what, if anything, they are teaching students around social emotional learning, and if they are not, offering our support and some professional development so that, in fact, this does become more of a regular part of pre-service training. So I just wanted to let you know that's on the horizon, and we're hopeful.
And I also think that's good next steps. I mean, that's something that's going to take a while in which to build the momentum. to where, we reach full saturation in not only in Illinois, but in, across the country. Barbara. Oh.
One of the things that stood out in the message this morning from the first speaker was the idea that as a result of SEL, the scores on the testing, standardized testing, was up 11 points. I think that that's going to be critical to anyone whose interest is high scores. That's going to be what opens the door to them listening to the message. So I think that that really needs to be a focus or a highlight of the message that goes out.
One more comment, then we're going to move to another bucket.
Good morning. My name is Lula Ford. I am the former principal of Beethoven Elementary School, and that's where I met Roger. But I was appalled to see that there was only 10 Chicago public schools that's involved. And Roger, I'd like to set up a meeting with you, myself, and Ron Huberman, because I think that we should solve this problem. I sit on a Blue Ribbon Committee about violence, and we have the avenue to correct some of these things. And I agree with you two ladies. Parent involvement and the low 100 schools should be involved.
Barbara, you had a comment?
Moving forward.
Very quickly, I just want to say that I think that the partnership would be delighted to also be involved in that discussion in terms of implementing that. But two other groups that I think we should add to our list of infrastructure development. One is school boards. I mean, really doing some outreach to school boards across the state to get them engaged in understanding this and promoting it in their districts. And the other is the statewide school reform groups. Whether it's a group that wants to change the financing of the schools or wants to increase school funding, or Advance Illinois that wants to impact the quality of the schools. We want to make sure that those statewide education-focused advocacy groups have SEL on their mind and recognize the role it plays in successful schools.
Yeah, that's a very important point about collaboration. Okay, one quick one.
I think this is not working, so I want to say that.
Incorporating SEL for the 0 to 5, in terms of bringing in, I work for the Department of Human Services on a statewide level. So the home visitation programs that the Department of Human Services has, we're talking healthy families, subsequent pregnancy, maybe targeted intensive prenatal. How do we incorporate SEL in what these home visitors are doing, certainly going into their home, having some impact there, and possibly being able to not only impact that 0 to 5, impact that mother and possibly a grandmother. So we're talking maybe 3 generations in terms of impacting that family. So how do we bring those home visitation programs that are already in place, and they're already having an impact in the homes, to impact their 0 to 5 population?
That's a great point, and it's something Andrea back there is one of the coordinators of the Healthy Families Program, and it's something we do talk about a lot at the Early Childhood Committee of the partnership, is about that integration and how we do that work.
And also, just to point out that virtually all of the systems in early childhood now have mental health consultation models, so that from the very beginning now, for preschool, child care, home visiting, pediatric practice, and I'm sure I'm leaving others out, Head Start, there are intentional efforts to focus on the promotion of good mental health and skill set building to be more aware of those kids who need more help, and we're using a consultation approach. So I think this is a great question that a lot of people will gladly take on and chew on and come up with some creative answers.
So we get you out on time. Let's switch over and talk a couple minutes about public awareness and support. So what are the key areas? And I think a couple of them have already been talked about. Karen, I think part of talking to higher ed is again another awareness piece. We talked about the parent college that's happening there. That's another awareness piece. But what are some of the other ways of building not only awareness but really building support, be it from the General Assembly here in Illinois to across the country, federal government level? Any ideas and places people think we should be moving forward?
I think we need to work with some of our organizations like the PTA, which has already added SEL to their bylaws. We need to work with some of our organizations like Illinois IASCD, Illinois Principals Association, which strongly supports SEL in some of the efforts that CASEL is making. We need to involve some of the organizations that are private. I don't know how we do Birth to 5 without relying on an ounce of prevention and some of the things that they have learned in working with them. There are all sorts of organizations that are doing education, and we need to tap into that, partner with them, and start building an infrastructure around some of those partnerships to change how we do business in schools.
And I will say the Ounce of Prevention is a great supporter, and we work with them often in Springfield. We're hand in hand going and talking about the SEL piece, so they are absolutely a great partner.
And Karen Friel from the Ounce of Prevention, and I co-chair the Early Childhood Committee. So, we're in daily contact with folks at the Ounce on this agenda item.
Back there.
I was just going to add that we are also in partnership now with the PTA. We have developed, and it is growing, a partnership primarily around our family advocates, and just very excited to be working with them.
There's a couple. Got people all over.
I just wanted to say that I think, and this might even fit better under infrastructure, but I'm going to say it anyway, in terms of support and advocacy and awareness, we need to see the link here, especially with our older youth, in the terms of preparing for college and careers. Chris Cook talked about that, and I think when we're talking about soft skill development, preparing our young people for the world of work, we have another link where we can bring in business leaders and some of the business networks that we have in the community as well, and get them on board regarding SEL.
I understand that the concentration today has been on what's going on in Illinois, but the Education Commission of the states has a ton of information and resources available, and particularly they've got a group that talks about service learning within schools, which is part of the SEL thing, and so they already have a lot of resources available, and I think they should, what we can do to publicize that.
Roger.
I just wanted to speak for a second about House Resolution 4223, HR 4223. That is the Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning Act of 2009, which calls for a National Training and Technical Assistance Center for SEL, and a state-financed program for SEL, and a district-financed program for SEL. And it would be terrific to get the entire Illinois delegation, if we could, championing and supporting and co-sponsoring this legislation. I think that this is something that can bring great national visibility to the work, and then I think that that will have impact all the way from states to districts to schools, and I think that I can't imagine a state that would be more competitive for a funding program like this than Illinois, because one of the key emphases is on implementation of SEL standards.
I'm going to quickly move into the evaluation and research. I don't want to give any, we don't want to miss this piece because this is a very, very important piece. So we talked, and Peter breezed through very quickly, and so did Roger, of some of the wonderful research and evaluation that's out there, that's coming out. But what is it you're looking for data-wise? What do you think will help help move this forward? What would you like to, what are your ideas? Peter? Feel free to jump in.
Well, let me just say that it was very clear from the schools that we visited that they're looking for some assessment. Maybe not all of them, but it's very clear that they're looking for assessment systems that guide them both in understanding the key issues, because I think Mary mentioned, not really knowing what bullying is until you really get some surveys back. So I think that is a key issue to keep in mind, as well as not only collecting the data, but also making the data available to the schools for school improvement, link it into school improvement plans and things of that nature.
And I don't want to be a complete shill and supporter for Peter, but I will say that his study is a really important study. It will be important to get the word out on your findings because there's so much to be learned about implementation of SEL programming and how it's done through a state initiative that provides professional development and how that translates to districts and schools. So that was a fantastic presentation today, Peter. The three other things that I would say is if I'd like to see one study, and you mentioned a foreshadowing of this, after the funding ends of this pilot, the whole question of what the 71 schools do in year 4 and what kind of continuation there's going to be is very important to look at for learning. A second thing is I think that it's very important to look at these 71 schools, and even though there's not a comparison group that was built into the original evaluation, just tracking over time what the improvements are, at least in the area of academic performance of these schools, would be enormously important to do. And finally, just to agree with you completely, the major focus of CASEL over the next, I would say, 5 years is really going to be in the area of assessment and developing good assessment tools and systems. And that, in terms of future work, is where a lot of outstanding work needs to be done.
And I just really want to quick, and one of the compelling messages that I thought of when you look towards, what do legislators look for when they're looking at funding? I think there was a couple pieces. One was the increase in test scores. And it's just the nature of where we're at funding-wise on a federal and state level. That's where schools are going. That's where they need. That's where they need the most support. I mean, when you can show that hard data of achievement scores going up, I think that gets everyone interested, and it gets everyone. Well, maybe we should take another look at this. We all feel they should do it just because they should do it anyway because it's good. But we know that they need to have those kind of pieces out there to make the case. And then the other piece was the cost-benefit analysis. We do a lot of prevention advocacy, and that's always the key: is for every dollar invested, how much is saved over the long haul. And the more that we can get that kind of data available to show, the more it just helps the work. There's a couple other hands.
Well, I was just going to say that
you got to wait for the.
It's a difficult thing when you're looking at assessing. Of course, academics is one thing. With the PBIS system, we look at our reduced suspension rate. There are some concrete things there we can look at. But what about even we're doing all these academic tests. The ISATs will hopefully be being modified next year or the year after. What about some questions in there that, like, as an employee who's taken tests like that say, what would you do, kind of, and frame questions about social justice and even volunteering? You can kind of track those kinds of things. But maybe embedded into our academic tests, we should have some social and behavioral questions that would interpret how children would respond in given situations, whether it's bullying or...
That's interesting, yeah. Great idea. I know there was another. Was there another? No? Okay.
I just want to reinforce what Ms. Ford said about the relationship to violence, too. I think that there are a lot of people concerned about violence prevention, and school scores going up is good, but so are fighting and disruptions and conflicts being resolved more peacefully, going down, and things being resolved more peacefully going up are also very important to a lot of people. And if we can make that connection as well, I think it would be good.
I want to make an observation. I would go back under the infrastructure and policy and funding, which is on the federal scene, we have new administration initiatives such as Race to the Top, the Early Learning Challenge Fund, hopefully. And what we know is going on is there is a lot of dialogue, and I believe a draft out of national learning standards, as well as more and more focus and dialogue and linkages to international benchmarks. So we're going to be, and we have, as I think it was Roger mentioned, the reauthorization and new naming of No Child Left Behind. And what all of that provides is this rich environment for discussion about changing the way education unfolds in the United States. But the reality is this particular dimension is in many ways missing from those dialogues. And it's going to be a challenge, and one that a few states right now understand the social and emotional learning standards in a state policy manner, and hopefully a few more are coming on. But to create the national dialogue and momentum really rests on too small a group right now, and the momentum is building very rapidly. So without discouraging folks, step one is simply to become more aware, whatever knowledge you have of these federal initiatives and whatever depth of understanding you bring, learn more about them. Look for ways where you might be able to talk more about them with your school districts or your professional associations or statewide groups, or from whatever perspective, but we're not in the dialogue yet. And this is going to be fertile times for education reform, and we don't want to miss the train. The train has left the station, but we have to be nimble and to be smart and be determined that there will be strategic places for us to get into the game. And that's going to take a really new level of expertise and awareness on all our parts, because this is not an arena that we've been playing in, so to speak.
Any other comments before we wrap this? You guys have been great. Thank you so much for participating. I know after we've heard such great things all morning, and it's sometimes hard to process it and get what you want to say out. So I want to thank all of you for participating today, and I'll turn it back over to Rachel.
All right, I'll just say a quick thank you to everyone. I want to thank, again, Roger and Barbara and our whole planning committee, and all of you, as Dawn just said, for contributing to this session. I think that was a great point to end on, Gaylord. So hopefully you'll walk out of here thinking about how you can get on that train and get it going. Thank you.